This week, we welcome Wendy Karr. We all know Wendy by now. She is a great Unity teacher, and we truly appreciate a good Wendy talk and are thrilled to have her back today. Today, she'll be speaking on the spiritual fathers of Unity. Even Unity's fathers have done some forgiveness work. So, Wendy, you're on.
Thank you. And it has been such a blessing to be with you these last weeks. And I include my own statement of being a white settler. And I am so thrilled that we are engaged in this. I think back to my childhood when we had folks from the Six Nations Reservation, as it has been termed, and really come to understand things at a deeper level in the last few years. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, live or on the recording, this is the third of a three-part series on based on the Book of Forgiveness by the Tutus. And in the third section of the book, and it was wonderful to be able to do this as a three-part series, because part 3 is all can be forgiven. And this is where we take the principles that we learned in the first 2 sections and apply it. And surprise, surprise, it's the smallest part of the book. So for those of you who haven't been on the calls or have forgotten what we talked about, because I don't know about you folks, but I take in a lot of information during the week. The basis of the Tutus book is that we have a choice. We can participate in a revenge cycle, and as you can see on the screen, where something causes us pain and we can choose to harm, reject our shared humanity, engage in revenge or retaliation or payback, which leads to additional violence and cruelty, which of course results in more hurt, harm, loss, and the pain, and it just becomes an endless loop. We can also choose to heal. And this has been the subject of the talks over the last couple weeks. And this, you'll notice, is not a circle. It's a line. It's actually, my experience is it's been all over the place, and that's good. As I do the forgiveness work and then discover a metaphysical dust bunny that's buried deep in my consciousness, something that I have stuffed down into the shadows, camouflage, put a do not enter sign on, and comes the time when it's time to bring those memories, that event, that relationship into the light for healing and wholeness. So in this, we tell the story, we name the hurt, we grant forgiveness. And the Tutus define forgiveness as recognizing our shared humanity, moving away from consciousness of the other into a consciousness of oneness, and then choosing whether or not we renew or release the relationship. Now, some of you are saying, well, Wendy, where's your stone this week? Well, last week we talked about renewing or releasing the relationship, and the stone has been released. And I like where it is. It's out in the garden where it will get sunshine and where animals will walk over it. And I'm thrilled with that. So there we are. So the last section of the book, we talk about needing forgiveness, that part of us where instead of saying, you hurt me, we say, I hurt you. And here are the statements that obviously there's more in the chapter, but just to summarize what they have discussed in that. Gather support as needed. This does not have to be an alone journey. This is not you as the pennant on some road in the middle of nowhere. Gather folks around you, whether it's in person or through prayer or through just letting them know, hey, could we meet for coffee? I could use some support right now. And I know that's one of the hardest things to ask for. I was guided to a book the other day when I was in a bookstore. Horrors. I spend way too much money there, but that's okay. And in the book, it's about a child and a horse, a mole, and a fox, and just their travels and discussions. And the boy asks, what is the bravest word you ever said? And the horse answers, help. And we don't like to say, I need help. We don't like to appear vulnerable. And yet that is probably the biggest part of our healing and whole and healthy mental health state. Admit the wrong. What did you do wrong? Witness the anguish and apologize. Don't jump to the apology. Allow the other person to share what they felt if you're doing this in person. Allow people to say, OMG, you did that? Really? I thought better of you. Allow that process of letting the pent-up emotion around the situation, the relationship, the whatever, to be expressed. Do not run too quickly to say, I apologize. Allow that communication to happen. Ask for forgiveness. Now, as I've shared before, there have been times I have asked for forgiveness and the person says, for what? And I've explained and said how badly I felt about it and what I would do to correct it. And they said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So a couple things are at play there. Either they have already done their forgiveness work, or your standard for what is hurtful is different than theirs and they didn't experience it as such, or they have chosen to slam it down in the shadows under camo so they can't deal with it. But in any case, that's why last week we talked about the importance of, consulting your inner wisdom, whether or not it's wise to reach out to the person in person, or if it is better that you participate in a burning bowl or writing a letter that you don't send, or some other practice where you go through the process in absentia and just allow and trust that the process still works in that way. And finally, honor your victim's choice to renew or release the relationship. That's a hard one, particularly if it's an intimate relationship and it's coming apart and you've done the work to try and put it back together and your partner says, no, I don't want to. And it can also be difficult if that person is no longer on this plane of existence, or if you've lost track of them and have no way of finding them. But just allow yourself to go through the process. I would say for myself, more often than not, I will do a burning bowl type of ceremony, just because I've been burned so many times trying to forgive that I clearly don't do it well in person. And I seem to have a higher awareness of hurts than some. So that's Wendy's addition to the tutus. But we all need to work through these things. The fact that you're carrying the baggage means that it's harming you, especially with those cases where someone says, I don't know what you're talking about. Who's been harmed by that? You have, because you've been carrying the baggage, and clearly at some level they haven't. So that's the first part in the third section of our book. And I find it interesting that forgiving yourself is actually at the end. And that's okay, because having gone through all this process, let me tell you, I've discovered a lot of things about myself that need to be forgiven. I have Wendy's rules of life. First rule of life is keep breathing, because let's face it, if you're not breathing, nothing else matters. Rule 2 is be gentle with yourself. And this is where we need to really take that breath and accept that, contrary to societal norms, we don't need to beat ourselves up. We can very gently take ourselves into our own hands and say, it's okay. You did the best you could. I still love you. So the tutus point out that we become imprisoned in the past when we do not forgive ourselves for past mistakes. Anyone else remember with some trepidation something they did in public school or elementary school? How long ago was that? Is it time to release that and let that emotion and let that energy go? If you've not sought forgiveness from your victim, do so. Forgiving yourself will be easier after you have sought forgiveness from your victim. Again, use guidelines for safety with that. I've loved the the idea that we've used in some of the conferences I've attended or workshops I've attended, where there have been 3 chairs set out, sort of in a triangle, one for you, one for your victim, and one for the observer. And to sit and you speak to the empty chair. So you're not getting into the aspect of, harming someone further by trying to apologize, but you have the observer there who can say, I hear you. I understand what you're saying, and just give you feedback on what you're saying, or be silent and just at the end of it say amen. We do not heal in isolation. Connecting with others is how we develop compassion for others and for ourselves. And I think that's really interesting. I've noticed lately there's been a thing going around Facebook about how important connection is, and how the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but is actually connection. And that's been hard these last couple of years with COVID lockdowns. This is why I'm so grateful that if I was going to be in a lockdown, if I was going to live through a pandemic, thank God I'm living through in a time where the technology is there to support a connection of sorts. It's not the same as having a cup of tea with people and getting hugged after service. It definitely isn't. And this is better than nothing. So that's what I have to say about the Tutu book. And I'm going to use, at the very back of the book, there is a final prayer, and that's what we're going to use for our meditation. But the title of my talk was Unity's Fathers. And what I'd like to do is take what we've learned these 3 weeks from the Tutu book and do sort of a case study on unity and segregation. And this is not an easy talk to give. I'm getting better with it as I give more talks about it. But I need to acknowledge, I'm a white person, I'm a white woman of privilege. I cannot fully understand what is being described. This is not my own material. I have cited my sources, truthunity.net and unity.org. And I got thinking about this, and I was hesitant to go back to this dark place. But then I heard the Toronto Police Services and their press conference about treatment of Black people and people of color in Toronto. And I realized the American experience is different in many ways, but we in Canada are not without our own issues in racism. So our first step, of course, is that there's been hurt, harm, or loss, which leads to pain, and choosing to heal. And in that, not only do we choose to heal, but we acknowledge and say, this is what's causing me pain. So what was causing pain? This is from 1993. So really not that long ago in terms of Unity's history. In 1993, ministerial students who at that point in time were living on site for 2 years and were, engaged in Unity day and night, realized and started to remind us that the Black story in Unity had been hidden, that it wasn't something we talked about. Now, I have to tell you, there's a part of me that says, yes, but I had Black ministers as my teachers. I had Black people in my community. As I may have mentioned in other talks, I have Black family on both sides, my maternal side and my paternal side. So for me, Blackness, and this is, I've talked to my cousins, and this is something that I am blind to, because I can't possibly have racist ideas because I have Black cousins. I don't see them as any different. And yet their experience in both Canada and the US has been different from me. So it's been a real eye-opener these last couple of years as I have come into a greater understanding of what this means and what anti-racism means. Anyway, back to our main story. So our group came together, went through the archives, and discovered many things that are upsetting, to be quite honest. Many things that are out of alignment with Unity's teachings. And so let's tell the story. I'm going to be very brief. I could do a number of talks on this. And I'm looking forward to getting back to Unity headquarters so I can go through the archives myself and see what else I can find. Segregation and racism in Unity, generally and specifically. Well, let's get into a little background and some history, because we have to have, context for things. In 1820, so before either of the Fillmores were born, the US Congress passes the Missouri Compromise, admitting Missouri to the Union as a slave state. To maintain a balance of slave and non-slave states, Maine is admitted as a free state. And the flag that you see there is the flag that has the stars representing Maine and Missouri on it, as it was until 1839, when the flag changed again. Now, I didn't know this thing about slave states and free states. And I got to tell you, my brain just went, what? Are you kidding me? And remember, Unity was founded in the state of Missouri. So the attitudes, the societal norms were that of a slave state. So slavery was a part of what made that state. It was accepted. Anyone else's brain going a little, say what? Fast forward 69 years. So Unity is founded by Charles and Myrtle Fillmore in Kansas City, Missouri, a segregated city. By this point, the Civil War is over, but there is still segregation. There is still an attitude of white people are superior, Black people are inferior. Many times in our early writings, you will see terms that are no longer accepted to be used. I won't use them, but I will just acknowledge that the idea of being colored is in there. There's a spot in the magazines where it says colored groups. We wouldn't do that now. That stayed on for quite a few years. So Unity has this as 1914, we're called Unity School of Christianity. And Charles describes it as the object of this school is the redemption of the human race. So by redemption, he's not meaning blood and the blood of Jesus. He's meaning that we change our minds around things so that we become more Christ-like, we express more of our divinity. At truthunity.net, they have a number of resources. And one of them is a beautiful thing where we have Black ministers. Now, ministers were not ordained who were Black until 1952 because they weren't, because it wasn't part of the consciousness at the time. So the Truth Unity staff have gathered together, and I've been pleased to see that fewer and fewer pictures have missing, are not identified. But the fact that this is on their website, take a look. Do you recognize any of them? Can you place a name on an unidentified person? Can you provide a photo of someone who is listed without an image? Can you send in a biography, a story in your own words about one of these teachers of truth? And of course, if you find a mistake, would you let me know so it's fixed? As of last night, there were still 11 unidentified Unity ministers from the classes of 1960 to 1988, people who went through, received their ordination, and have lost their names to the annals of history. Naming the hurt, briefly, and this is from my white perspective, treated as less than, and their treatment was not in alignment with Unity's proclaimed teachings. In 1927, it's noted that in a speech at the Unity Summer Conference, Charles Fillmore says, "We see no separation in color, in race, in sect, in creed, in anything. We are all one in spirit." And yet, he makes occasional jokes about Black people in his Sunday lessons. And a lot of them are really difficult to read. They don't appear in the books. They don't appear in the published, most of the published material. They appear in his original notes. They do appear, however, in the Unity Weekly magazines. So it wasn't just Charles was the only one. There was systemic racism in Unity in the early days. And that's a hard pill to swallow. On the one hand, we're saying we're all one, and on the other, we're treating someone as the other. The brunt of jokes, the comments. Do we share this testimonial about prayer? Do we need to note that this woman was a Negro? Do we need to say that she's colored? What does it matter? But at the time, because of the attitudes in Kansas City, it mattered. So people like Dr. James Elliott, who was an LUT, got his LUT status in 1941. He was also a dentist, and yet his history has been lost for the most part. Many of the people we know about, it's only because we have the paperwork that they submitted to become a licensed teacher or a minister, and that's how we know anything about them. Most of the white people, we know lots about them. We know where they spoke. We know what churches they served. We know who they were interacting with. We have pictures of them at conferences. We have pictures of them at their church. We do not have that history for the Black community. And that's something that Unity needed to fix, needed to acknowledge, needed to claim and take responsibility for. So granting forgiveness, actively seeking out the missing history, restore Black leaders to the rightful place in Unity's history, and acknowledge prior behavior and co-create a plan with Black ministers. So 1994, the year after this had begun, Unity School of Christianity issued a statement called Honoring Diversity Within the Unity Movement. It wasn't perfect, but it was a good start. It was a beginning. Later that decade, we have a diversity council that brings in consultants to facilitate workshops with the staff and board, because part of the challenge is that the staff and the board are also primarily white, ignorant of what's happened. And we have some history. Some of you may know of Dr. Reverend Johnny Coleman, who actually left Unity. She was the one that broke the color barrier. But after a while, she got so tired of what was happening, she went and formed her own organization, to Unity's loss, because she was an amazing woman with amazing ideas and amazing ways of sharing spiritual knowledge. But since it's Father's Day, we'll leave Johnny for another day. 10 years after that initial statement from these students, we have a joint statement called Enhancing the Dream. And it's issued jointly by Tom Zender, the then CEO of Unity School, and Glenn Mosley, the then president and CEO of the Association of Unity Churches, which is now Unity Worldwide Ministries, formally apologizing for the racial history of Unity and offering to conduct a healing ceremony. In 2004, that healing ceremony is part of the student-led celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And leaders apologized and acknowledged past discrimination. But I think about that, and I think I had already been in the field as a licensed teacher for 4 years when that happened. This isn't ancient history. This is very recent history, trying to come through and make amends for past errors of thought and belief. The final step is renew or release. And the choice has been made, for the most part, to renew the relationship, capture the history, and set policies and training in place for diversity, equity, and inclusion. In 2017, Martin Luther King Jr. Day became a paid holiday for employees at Unity World headquarters. 2 years ago, Juneteenth became a paid holiday for employees. Some of you may be saying, Juneteenth, what's Juneteenth? Juneteenth is a celebration of June 19th, the day in 1865 when the people of Texas were finally informed, 2.5 years after the fact, that any and all enslaved people in the Confederate States were no longer property of their masters. And given my history, I struggle with that concept, that the Emancipation Proclamation, I had always assumed, wrongly, that the slaves were freed immediately. No, those in Texas stayed enslaved for 2.5 years longer than those who were freed immediately after the proclamation was created. And so Juneteenth is the day that is celebrated in most of the US, or significant parts of the US, to honor that space, to honor that freedom. Now, it wasn't quite as free as they thought it was going to be. We get into the Jim Crow laws and segregation again, and rights being taken away from Black people. And we have, you know, the colored parts of the buildings and the white parts of buildings, and the whole issues of where do you ride on the bus, and where do you drink from the fountain, and where do you go to the bathroom, and can you go through the front door of the hotel? Are you even welcome at the hotel? And it's not till 65 that we get the civil, what we, being the Americans, get the Civil Rights Act. And yet we're seeing aspects of this rising up. I'm pleased to say that for the most part, Unity has held firm to its tradition of making amends, correcting behavior, and ensuring that this doesn't happen again. If you go to unity.org, you can find the diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. Together, we embrace our individuality. We celebrate our uniqueness with full acceptance of all people, including every expression of the divine. We come together with love and compassion to be a light for all. We stand together in unity. As a credentialed leader in Unity, I am required to take at least one set of credits on diversity, equity, and inclusion every year to keep my license active, as are all ministers and LUTs. This is what we do now. This is how we say never again. This is how we say how wrong we were at the time. And though I was not part of it directly, I can see in hindsight that there were assumptions I made. And there are assumptions being made even in Canada that are no longer true. Speaking with an older member one day, I happened to mention that many Canadians were now attending Unity's Urban Ministerial School, which was originally created as a source for Black ministers, as a way for people in the Detroit area to become ministers so they could serve the inner city Black communities. And as I mentioned that, she said, "Oh, I thought that was a Black school." And I sort of took a breath and I said, "Well, it used to be, but not any longer." And I have been told of the story of a time when the white dean of the Unity School went to the Urban Ministerial School to visit and provide some instruction for one of the classes. And a gentleman was overheard to say, "I didn't know they let white people into Unity." And so it has been a challenge of finding our place, of finding that way of reaching out that honors the path of both sides, that honors the path of everyone, every individual, of acknowledges that we all have our own path, we all have our own quirks, we all have our own passions, and that we are part of the greater oneness, not part of the others. Is the work complete? No. Nope, nope, nobody, nope. There's room for improvement. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like, because not being Black, it's not mine to say what that looks like. It is mine as a white person to listen openly, not to be thinking about resolutions or how to respond, but to listen truly and confidently. And guess what? That's just like our personal forgiveness journey. So I thank you for listening, And now let us prepare for our meditation. And I'll just invite you to get comfortable. Give a wiggle if you need to. And bringing ourselves heart to heart, hand to hand, soul to soul, in the oneness that we are. Finding that space within our body, that closet Jesus talked about, where we go within and find the oneness, experience the oneness, and breathe into it. And from the Tutu book, let us listen to what the heart hears. Here is my book of forgiving. The pages are well worn. Here are the places I struggled. Here are the places I passed through with ease. Here is my book of forgiving. Some of its pages are tear-stained and torn. Some are decorated with joy and laughter. Some of its pages are written with hope. Some are etched with despair. This is my book of forgiving. This book is full of stories and secrets. It tells how I finally broke free from being defined by injury and chose to become a creator again. Offering forgiveness, accepting that I am forgiven, creating a world of peace. And let us just take these words into our hearts in the silence. And as we come back into this space, we give thanks for this trip of forgiveness, for the Tutus and others for sharing their stories, for showing us a path that works, for showing us a path that can heal, showing a path that can renew and restore, showing the path to wholeness. And on this Juneteenth, we give thanks for freedom and commit to doing that which is ours to do to ensure that all are free, starting with ourselves. And so it is, and so it shall be. Amen.